Evening, guys. Good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Last time was a little bit formal. We tried to address as clearly as possible what we do, why we do it, how we do it. This will be much more conversational. There's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of it is negative. And all of it puts a lot of important things in perspective. And that's kind of what I wanted to go over tonight. We'll cover any questions anybody has, but I'm going to talk a little bit. And if any of the stuff I'm saying elicits questions, then that would be really helpful. We have a couple of questions that came up in the last 24 hours, mostly relating to training. One involving how we set maces on fire. I'm not sure if we're going to answer that or not, because some things should just better be left undone. But for now, I'm going to start off reading something short that we posted a couple of months ago. If many put more into the honorable act of doing and less into the barren patterns of mindless naysaying and displaying, so much of what we end up hearing and seeing would be far less trite, confusing, and disgusting. Use your voice wisely, or don't expect it to be taken seriously. Something I've been thinking about a lot is tolerance and intolerance. We get called a lot of names lately. A lot of them are mean. And a lot of you guys will never see them because unless someone has some constructive criticism, if they're just coming on to call names and insult what we do, and realistically, by insulting us, insulting all of you, it makes me think a lot about how we got where we are. I believe I have an extremely ethically sound, well-informed, well-vetted position on tolerance and intolerance. I had a relatively normal childhood, normal-ish, I guess. Normal in the sense that the neighbor kids told on us for shooting hunters with a BB gun because they were too close to the homes. And when they did that, we built a secret room out of hay bales and put some dead animals in the bottom and then trapped them in it. Just to level the playing field. That's normal, right? We just always had a clear sense of right and wrong, and we also kind of knew when we were doing wrong. We also knew when we were not doing any harm. And that was really important. The neighbor kids didn't like us too much. The hunters didn't like us too much. But we were good neighbors, and I think we still are. Intolerance was put in front of me in the form of Christianity early. I respect very much people that are spiritual and religious that use it for self-betterment and not as a tool of judgment. That was not what I was exposed to. So from a very early age, I really had a lot of perspectives on what was bad and what was evil and what was a sin and all these different things. And as soon as I started forging my own mind, which was early, there were holes in the boat. A lot of the people I met really early were great, but they were also rough. And then as I kept moving on, the people got rougher, but they also still got better. One of the earliest memories I have of being ostracized in a way that really landed and stayed was going to youth group with an Overkill shirt on. I was very young. That was one of the first bands I ever really got a shirt from. I would have people take me to the House of Guitars here in Rochester, and even if I didn't know anything about the band, I would just get something that looked scary and mean because it's just what I was feeling. So, I would wear that stuff to the youth group that my mom would send us to, and I just remember very distinctly just, feeling like I had leprosy or something. I was over in the corner and everybody else was doing what they were doing. And I didn't understand it at the time. And I do understand it now, but at the same time, I do not understand it now. But that was really my introduction to the fact that something super, super simple can just absolutely derail someone if they do not have any tolerance for anything different than what they do or wear or think or say. Maybe my next instance of myth debunking was one of my earliest jobs was cleaning my dad's office. He had a small office in a small office park where I grew up. I could ride my bike there, and so I would ride my bike there in the evenings, and we'd clean the office park. And in cleaning it, late one night, I realized that there was a practice space in the back. Heavy metal band practice there. Hard rock band. I don't know at the time what you'd call it. But they weren't like a glam rock band. They were like more in the middle. Overkill is a good example, actually. They just kind of looked like hard dudes and wore cool clothes. And I didn't know anything about anything. I was probably 13 years old. And I just walked in there and said hi. And they were kind of surprised. I was kind of surprised. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But they looked cool. They looked wild. There were some girls in there. And I stuck around. They played some music. They were nice to me. And I dug it. I was young. I didn't know anything, but these guys seemed cool. They also immediately seemed pretty much the exact opposite of anything that I'd been told was evil or bad or a sin. So there's a lot of dichotomy going on in my mind because I'm young. And unless your parents are truly terrible, you want to believe what they're telling you at those ages. So I would go back and hang out with these bands, and there was a really big guy that hung out there, and they called him Big Trouble. And because I was always open to just like goofing around and doing relatively harmless stuff, they called me Little Trouble. And if there was something to break or set on fire or smash or whatever in a relatively harmless way, we would. We weren't harming anybody or anything, and I was kind of, in a trial by fire type of way, learning that there was a lot more out there than I really realized. And those much older guys who were super crazy and they would drink a lot and do crazy stuff in there, I wouldn't. That was never my thing, and it still isn't. But it was cool to be around them, and it was cool to realize that they were not bad people. They were good people. They looked out for me. They drove me home occasionally. I rode my bike there. It was a long distance, and it was dark. They drove me home a few times. They were not what they seemed. And that was super important to learn. Even more important now to think about, especially with this new world standard of subjective truth. Everything some people say is true and nothing that others say is. That's an impossible situation to navigate. Once I got a little older, it all changed again. A lot of people that have heard us talk at all know that, when I went to the grocery store and, found a BMX magazine, that was it. I saw the music that I wanted to be attached to. I saw the life that I wanted to be attached to, and I followed it. I was a sports kid. I was okay at that. And my next exposure to just totally being kicked to the curb was when I picked up BMX bike riding, and that kind of stuff changed for me. Almost all of the sports kids bounced immediately. There was no tolerance there for anything that wasn't cut from the exact same cloth. There was a few that stayed. There's a couple of stories in one of the books about them, and I respected that a lot, and I still respect it. But the reality is, as soon as I changed, people left. I didn't understand it then. I still don't understand it now. But I'm glad I don't understand it now. And I'm glad I made the choices I did then. The BMX thing was one. Then it was everything. It was writing for the high school newspaper. I wrote stories about what was really prevalent at the time in the suburb I grew up in was acid. So I wrote a story about ravers and how silly I thought that was, and how I thought it was really stupid to have a music culture that was primarily centered around people getting high and wearing ridiculous clothes. It was a little bit of a judgmental article, and I got handled accordingly for it. I wrote some reviews. I wrote a couple other stories that got me in some hot water. But there was never any malicious intent. I was just a curious mind, and I had a voice for it, and I used it. And that was when I started realizing too the power of words, having to keep them sharp and never taking them for granted. Taking an audience for granted is disrespectful to everyone involved. That taught me a lot in high school. As soon as I changed course and I ended up bike riding all the time and pursuing hardcore and all these different things, I was treated like a pariah in high school. We got into certain types of trouble with people. I was shoved in the halls and all this kind of stuff. And I wouldn't call it bullying because that's glamorizing it a little bit, but I wasn't treated well and I didn't have a lot of friends. So that makes for kind of a dicey situation. You learn to fight, you learn to think, you learn to avoid trouble whenever you possibly can. But the other thing you learn is tolerance, because certain people do want to stay near you. Certain people do want to help you. It's not this complete across the board dismissal. When one door closes, another one opens. And that's what I started hunting for, is that open door. Two things quick, and then a couple people are going to shut the fuck up in the comments. One, not everything is solved with smashing anything. Two, I know an awful lot of really great Christians. The purpose behind mentioning that at all was the fact that the way that it was presented to me is extremely judgmental and was not developmental. It was limiting. So I identified it, respect the pieces of it that I can still respect, and left the rest. So let's keep it positive. During high school, I had an internship at a paper, an actual newspaper. I wrote movie reviews. I mentioned this quickly at our group in the other week. I also wrote the horoscopes. So don't trust the horoscopes. That was fun. It was interesting. The guys that owned it were really, really rich. One of them was an Arab guy. The other guy was white. And they were really, really cool to me. They could just kind of see that I had something different going on, and they didn't care. They loved it. You know, they would give me movie passes and, man, just send me out and tell me to do interesting stuff for the paper. They understood that what I was driven by was creativity and pursuit of something a little bit different than most people were pursuing at the time. And they respected that. They didn't have to give me an internship. And they knew that they should also be paying me because I worked really hard. And so that was on the flip side of things, where I started learning that tolerance did not have one particular flavor. It came in all different sizes and colors, and you just had to look for it in order to find it. And when I fucking found it, I held on tight. And I did a great job, because once you've been pushed down and left for nothing over something that was just, kind of an elective choice, you understand how that feels. By no means am I sitting here saying that I had some, rough upbringing or that I'm saying that I've been ostracized to a point of danger or anything like that. But when we grew up, it was different. If you didn't fit with a certain type of clique of people, you didn't really have anything to go by. You had to make your own way. You had to find your own friends. And that's what we did. And then what that taught me that might have been the most important is that I wanted to be that for everybody. I wanted to be something that anyone who was a good person, who was trying to do good stuff, could rely on anytime they needed it. And that became the most important thing for me. I went through ebbs and flows of being a little bit intolerant in certain things. When I was younger, straight edge was a big deal, and it's still a big deal, and it's still a tenet that I think is extremely important and valuable for the people that are doing it right. And I'll tell you what, when I started realizing that straight edge was much more personal than scene-wide or a shirt or anything like that, I changed course on how I promoted that kind of stuff. I've never been someone that wore a ton of shirts that said a ton of shit. I wear things from people I support, and I love that, and I take that very seriously. Nothing I ever wear is incidental. And even then, nothing I wore was incidental. I learned the hard way early also that a lot of people that screamed the loudest were the fakest. They had nothing to offer. And what they did have to offer was just schisms. acrimony, fucking bullshit, trouble, bad trouble we didn't want. Early on, we would judge people for doing things in some different ways, but only if they were doing them in harmful ways. One example of story I don't know if I've ever mentioned on here is one of my weird jobs when I was younger, much younger, was I worked for a pool supply center. One of my friends at the time got me the job. We mixed chemicals in these huge buckets and carried these chemicals to different vans and drove them around and dropped them off at people's houses that had pools, of course, and we'd come back and just kind of do grunt work. And it was fun and cool. And, you got to lift heavy stuff and scoot around the neighborhood and whatever. And the owner was a real dick. And his wife was, in thinking back, I believe the first person I ever had exposure to that was a real, actual heavy duty drug addict. She was bananas. And I started noticing that there was a lot of stuff going on there that didn't really make a lot of sense with what I knew the business was. So I started poking around a little bit. And what I learned is that they were selling cocaine out of the pool shop. And that's most of what she was doing all day. And that's why she was so nuts. So, with how I was feeling about straight edge and what I was doing in my other life, going to shows, riding BMX bikes, traveling around for music and riding and things like that, I got super angry that I was in an environment that was like that, and I didn't even know it. And I'm not touting this as a good idea. I'm just telling you a story about what happened at the time. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I kept thinking, what if I got in trouble for being in a place where they were selling cocaine to people? What if that was how I got stuck? What if that was how I got jammed up? So we went back and cut all the tires of the vans and smashed all the windows and spray painted straight edge on different things and whatever. And in hindsight, that's not how I would handle it again. But handling it that way at the time felt like true conviction. Reflecting again, I realized that a singular action is not true conviction. You have to stand and you have to stay standing. Something short that we wrote, we've only shared once. We struggle, we fight, we win, we lose. Profit will never guide process, and we always overpay our dues. If you question your will to fight as the fight gets harder, the questions will get louder. Anything that feels super important has to be entered with a clarity of vision and a pretty singular purpose, or it's best to just not enter. And you learn that only after doing it wrong. Sometimes you can do it right also, and it teaches you, but most of the time what teaches you the hardest is doing it wrong. And that's where I was. I had made some choices that I didn't really think were the best, and I identified that, and I adjusted. That was when I started realizing that I was never going to be super employable. And then some of my next jobs definitely kind of nailed that coffin shut for me. I worked in several health food stores when I was younger. It didn't necessarily go well. But what it did is it exposed me to a ton of different people. My tolerance for people that were insincere, opportunistic, unkind to others was very, very low already. But my patience and acceptance and enjoyment of people who were the opposite of that was infinite. And I ended up with some really close friends of people that I had absolutely nothing in common with. My one manager at the first health food store that I worked at was, at the time, double my age, gay man, and just a movie buff, absolute maniac. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of friends, and I was kind of just in a real strange, isolated, some really crazy shit had happened to me, and it was a negative time. And he was super important to me, and we couldn't have had less in common. And then when I changed jobs, I moved to another health food store. I met a whole other group of people that really had nothing in common with me except for the fact that we all cared about each other, and that was it. Everyone did the right thing because it was just the right thing. Some of those people I fell out with, and some I still know. All that I was told when I was young was bad and sinful, corrupt, was basically everything that I was drawn to. I'm not talking about drugs and sex and all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm talking about people that on the cover of the book would not have been anyone that some of my original influences would have thought were okay. First and foremost, of course, we know that creates a gigantic amount of appeal, but often it's a fleeting appeal. For me, I started seeing that in a way I was tricked, because these people were the ones that actually had the hearts. These people were the ones that were actually thinking and doing. And like I mentioned in the very beginning, they were putting a lot of time and energy into the honorable act of doing. At the time, displaying wasn't really a thing. Art, music, aesthetics, language, they all became extremely important to me, but they weren't, none of it was paint by number. None of it was standard or at the time normal at all. I didn't really realize that, and it didn't matter. How could these people be bad if they were just simply so great? And that's when you start learning that tolerance really is a broad brush. And intolerance is way easier to find, but man, way more important to just squash when you come up on it. If we start expanding into what we go through now, anything I've ever done with training, anything like that, has been based on the willingness of the people that we're exposed to work hard and to do so more than once. Anyone with consistency, integrity, positive intentions has been helped as thoroughly as we possibly can at really a lot of times often great expense to us. One of my first private training clients in Long Beach was a Mexican guy with a skin condition, and he had to train in what was essentially a sauna suit, and it was very challenging. And he was a valuable one for me because he was a really, really good dude, and he had absolutely no advantages. He was he was an uphill battle that I wanted to take because he wanted to be in it. He wanted to be in the battle. I learned a lot from that. And the biggest thing that I learned is that you can take anybody with any type of disadvantage, and they may not make the same amount of progress as someone with less disadvantages, but they're going to care 10 times more about that fractional improvement than someone who already has a lot of positive attributes on the table. That taught me an awful lot. When we would book shows and people would travel from out of town, we always tried to do everything we could to make sure that they either didn't pay or they paid less or they at least had somewhere to stay or something to eat. And that was never forgotten about. That was never overlooked. Never one single time in any of these processes did any of that have anything to do with how someone looked, ethnicity, gender, race, sexual orientation. It didn't even enter our minds then. And it enters it even less now. One of the reasons I think that's the case is because good people have become fewer and more far between ever since I was young. So now when we find someone who wants to work and cares about what we do and is willing to contribute a little bit, we help them at all costs, and we will always do so. We've come upon some really significant challenges lately, and most of them are simply based on the fact that everyone is willing to judge a book by its cover. Everything some people say is true, and nothing that others say is. And one of the biggest challenges with us, I believe, is that subjectivity of the truth these days. We're provers, we're not talkers. It's the same thing with training. If we can't put something on the table that we can prove is better, at least equal, and applicable to almost everybody, we don't put it on the table. And the reason being is because there's already enough shit food on the table. Unless we can put something worth eating on the table, we don't. I've always tried to do that, but especially now, we're really just convicted by that. Some of the stuff that we've been learning lately is troublesome, to say the very least. A piece of information that I got this week puts someone that came here internationally to Convergence a couple years ago, had come here for opportunistic reasons and has since used it to harm us. It's really hard to not be a little paranoid and a little bit hyper alert when you start realizing that there really are sometimes just people who are looking to harm you. We're learning that the hard way, and what we're doing amidst that is not changing what we're doing. If we change when the water gets hot, then we weren't really convicted to a process. You can't just fight when it's comfortable. And especially at a time like this where it's the most important to stand behind what you do, and it's a death sentence to backpedal and make excuses and over apologize and all this kind of stuff. It just makes it extremely clear what we need to do, and that's just continue to do the exact thing that we're doing better every single day for as many people as we can possibly do it for. And that's really the long and short of it. When we talked about what we were going to talk about, when we discussed what we were going to talk about in the Instagram Live tonight, we decided to keep some of the training stuff off the table. I'll mention this: we're making a I don't know how to say this. Patreon, Voltron. I don't give a fuck. We're making one, and it's because we give away so much. We've given away everything we have almost. But what we're going to put in there is some more short pieces, not quite like this, but similar to this. We're going to teach the entire curriculum priorities list as opposed to just demonstrating it. So you'll get to see it taught on a couple of different bodies. And then we're just going to have other cool stuff. We're going to have some of the people we work with do some drills that we put on there, and just kind of mixed modality drills that can help you improve. Whether you have a gym, whether you don't have a gym, whether all you have is outside, there's always something to do, and there's always ways to improve. So that's what we're going to do with that paid platform. There'll be a couple different tiers for it, like there is with those things, and we're really excited about that, because the reality is we've been kicked down a lot this year, and losing our access point for the Maces at the time crushed our retail at a time when that was something that was helping drive our business as the government attempts to put it out of business. And so we've stumbled by our own accord several times, and we've stumbled an awful lot based on other people's and I think right now we're just trying to balance it out. So let's look at a couple of questions. If you have any questions on anything I just said, even if they're funny ones, you're more than welcome to ask them. I really wanted to make sure that what we addressed is the fact that we didn't just drop into this world, and we didn't just jump into fitness willy-nilly, and nothing that we show or do or say is without a very long-term foundation. The stuff that I'm involved in now, I've been involved in for a long time. Some of the stuff I've been involved with since some of its beginnings. And, I'm still young, so that seems kind of strange, but I have understandings of certain things that some people won't, simply because they came into it too late. I've been through the fire with hardcore. I know exactly what that stuff looks like. I've had my hands on more white supremacists than most of you all have ever fucking seen. And I don't think that that's right or wrong either, but it's just a fact. Sometimes if you stand up for something that's not popular, sometimes you have to actually fight for that thing. We have never accepted intolerance. The things that we're intolerant of are things that are just ethically wrong. If you're mean to people for no reason, if you hate people based on things that they can't control, if you're willing to harm anyone for a reason that isn't a really legitimate reason, we are not tolerant of you. If you're not on that short list, then, we just simply are. That's it. I just wanted to make sure we landed that before we talked about any of this other stuff. Just don't make a mess. Yeah, Chair. Jeez, man. That security guard story got a lot of cool responses, and it was really funny. There's the, what did you do to light your mates on fire? Ian, I'm not answering it, man. So a couple of cool questions on the kettlebell drill that we use to practice locating a target with a pistol. I like to stay in my lane on things like that. I'm not a shooting instructor. I was extremely fortunate that early on in my martial arts early on in my martial arts practice, my instructors had us treat everything like a martial art. Knives, guns, sticks, shirts, anything. They were super adaptable with it. They were trained by some of the very best in the world, some of the very best ever. And I was just absolutely super fortunate to have access to that. So I stay in my lane with that stuff. And when people ask me on a personal level and locally to help them, I will. That drill is different because it wasn't to teach shooting mechanics or anything else. It was to develop visual acuity for sight acquisition while you're moving. That's a drill that's valuable. It's simple. If you train your brain to find a specific type of thing, the more you train it, the better it will find that specific type of thing. For actual shooting drills, our friend Johnny Primo has been on here tonight, and he's someone that we defer to that stuff because he's phenomenal. There are other people out there that are great, but make sure they're vetted. Make sure they're not selling you bullshit. And then as far as transferable concept stuff, we are going to do more of that. We've done a bunch of it with grappling. That's something that I can really dig a little bit deeper into. And we've done some with striking as well. Some of the stuff was on the Wimp to Warrior platform with our friend Scott Viscomi. Some of that stuff is on our remote development resource site, the Subversive Fitness site. And for any of you that have been looking for a training that you haven't found during this strange time and haven't seen that site, I recommend you go look at it. It's excellent. There are personal assessments of movements that get people to the point where they're ready to train in the primary program, and then previously performed days of our primary program are on that site, along with a bunch of different drills that you won't have seen elsewhere, and some supplemental programs for the mace, supplemental programs for fighting, and things like that. So yeah, the dot connecting stuff, we're excited about it. Some of the gun stuff, I like to stay right in my lane. No other questions. Nobody has any other questions. Everyone's just sick of hearing everyone talk, and I don't blame you. That's one of the reasons that we keep being hesitant to do these things, but we do get good feedback on them. And sometimes it's also important to articulate a position from its beginning and not just in a sentence or two in the text body of a post. And that's one of the things we wanted to accomplish tonight. If I like something or dislike something, there's a foundation behind it, and chances are I've earned it the hard way. Thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. That's a highly expansive question. The people that train on site, minus the tourists, minus some of these professional tire kickers, high-paid people protectors that don't actually pursue advancement in their skill sets. Outside of those lazy fucks, everyone that we train is excellent. I learn from them every single day. And then that's not just lip service. When I'm teaching a class, I'm watching that class in a somewhat obsessive way. And if you're watching in that way all the time, you will learn all the time. We learn how to assess and improve movement in little tiny little intervals all the time. And I believe that I'm still improving at that even after doing this for a long time. The other thing is you start learning about people's constitutions. You learn what makes people up, and you learn what makes them fold and what makes them stronger. And then that's when you start looking at program design. Okay, so you can push this type of person to this type of level and this type of person to this type of level, but how do you get them there together without either breaking their brains or breaking their bodies? Thank you. And then that's when you start to learn more about the process. So when we think about how I lead Wolf Brigade, I mean, philosophically, language-wise, movement detail-wise, program design, training design, things like that. Those are things that I've constructed over a long period of time. I mean, I've been writing training for a long time. And, you know, you do it somewhat mediocre, and then you do it a little bit better. And then once you start realizing what makes it tick, and you start realizing that the best testing ground is yourself, you start learning everything you need to learn. If you can get it to work on yourself and find holes in the boat, and then you get it to work on others, then it works. Then it works on everybody. And that's the nice thing is the way that we learn from people at Wolf Brigade every day is their movements are never going to be perfect, but they're as close as they can possibly get all the time because of positive reinforcement on what they're doing right and concise, specific reinforcement of what they need to improve and work on. And if you can't get that from your trainers, it's really tough because you're essentially just at that point exercising. And there's nothing wrong with that. When we say exercising versus training, I'm not casting aspersions on one versus the other, but training is always moving towards a bigger goal. It's moving towards actual tangible improvement. We call it a lifelong linear progression. You're always improving in something. And unless you're a specialist, that something is going to shift. But that's great because not everyone needs a 600-pound squat. But everyone needs a 250-pound squat and a 100-pound kettlebell swing and a half bodyweight Turkish get-up and a 10-kilogram mace swing and a really fast trip on the Airdyne. When you start simplifying it and then standardizing the movement patterns and applying them to everybody, you start seeing a gigantic amount of progress, both on a singular and a group level. And when you can start getting the high-level performers to move forward and improve, and then that will influence and inform the people that are newer and still learning, it just ends up a really great mix. And that's really, I believe, the biggest value of what we've constructed at Wolf Brigade is it's a group class, but it is not like any group class that I have ever seen or been a part of. And I've participated in and led and worked in a ton of different places. I've touted this many times before, but coming from martial arts into strength and conditioning, I believe was the biggest advantage possible. Because in martial arts class, never will you hear a good instructor say, yeah, you just grab the arm and twist it however you want. It doesn't matter. No, you've got people detailing down things to these absolutely surgical little levels, and then that's what makes them work at the higher levels. I've never understood how that doesn't really land all that much in fitness. I've never understood how people that will obsess over 50 different positions of an arm bar will do terrible squats and anti-swings and shitty push-ups and all this kind of casualist fitness stuff, when with the same level of detail they put into their other practice, that strength and conditioning would improve that practice to a degree that is truly almost comical. I've talked about this before too. When we teach people that have started in our program strength and conditioning, when we start teaching them martial arts, it's easy. I mean, it's easy. It's phenomenal. Their power is there. They understand floor to extremity mechanics. They understand timing, they understand durability, they understand breathing and bracing. And their constitution is such that they know they're going to get banged up a little bit. They know they're going to be safe. They know they're durable. And they become phenomenal martial artists. And that's, I mean, that to me, that's the holy grail. You know, we're fortunate now. We've got some people that we've trained that are succeeding in martial arts. Our friend Mark just signed a new contract with Lion Fight, and we're super proud of him. One of our other agents, Dan Collar, is down in Austin right now, and is just the nicest kid in the world and a phenomenal bike rider. We just aligned with Matt Heafy from Trivium, and he's been swinging the mace and practicing every day and sending us updates. And one of my only other private training clients is a professional baseball player named Rob Cimarano, and we are dissecting everything he's doing and have been for a while. And we're putting tangible miles per hour on the pitch that he throws. He's an older guy, and he's still improving every single day, and it's because he hunts for it, and it's because he actually gives a shit. That's all it really takes. If somebody gives a shit and they're willing to be respectful about it, we will help them until the day we fucking die. And the flip side of that is only if people aren't on that page, that's where our intolerance kicks in. This new world of faceless digital acrimony that tends to derail progress of places like ours is frustrating. It's got our number, that's for sure. The more we get targeted, the more damage it does, and the longer it takes us to get anywhere. You know, we've been doing this an awful long time, and we're still really small. Part of that is we just present differently, you know, and a lot of times people will turn something off as soon as they see that it's a little different. But those that don't, I believe, are glad they didn't. And a lot of them tell us that they're glad they didn't. And that means a lot to us. Any more questions tonight? Where's Brandon? I need someone to talk to. I enjoy these things, but hearing my own voice is not something that I enjoy, and I have to be patient with myself because I want to talk slower and say things better. I don't just want to rattle off, waste anyone's attention span, and say something that you can hear anywhere else. If we're not landing something that's a little bit unique and hopefully a little bit thought-provoking, then you know this is a true and actual waste of time. If anybody's got any more questions, great. If not, I'm gonna go and do some work and then sit on the ground and try and fix my body for a little while. Bailey, thank you as always, man. What is my opinion on the use of chalk in training? You're really gonna have me close up with this? This is like when Bailey asks about like hardcore record versus hardcore record questions. So listen, we'll do this. So chalk and belts. Until you are lifting an amount of weight that is near your absolute structural max, you shouldn't be using chalk, you shouldn't be using a belt. The problem with those things is that they develop false sense of security. If you're holding on to something that you can't physically hold on to, there's a problem there. And the problem is you can't hold on to it. If you can only change levels with a belt on, hinge, squat, deadlift, swing, whatever you want to call it, the problem is the fact that you have not built the power source in a way that will insulate the extension cords. If you're competing in powerlifting, if you're really, really strong and you're lifting gigantic amounts of weight, when you get to your upper end sets, great, put a belt on, put it on correctly. If you're lifting things for money, if you're lifting things in competition, use some chalk. But if you're lifting a 53-pound kettlebell and you can't hold on to that thing, the problem is not the kettlebell. The problem is the fact that you haven't built the grip to mirror the other attributes. If you can't perform a reasonable weight squat and a reasonable weight deadlift with proper bracing and excellent mechanics without a belt on, well, you put the cart before the horse. That's the problem. So belts and chalk, we don't use them. If people have a certain direction and we're training them for something very specific, then they get added in only when they absolutely need to be. And I'll tell you what, not using them as a crutch and only applying them when absolutely needed for highest level performance makes them extremely, extremely valuable, as opposed to just a strap-on tool. A lot of chalk or a belt in mixed modality strength and conditioning is short-sighted in my opinion. That's a great question. Thank you guys. Anytime you have questions on this, ask them ahead of time. You can ask them anytime. I save them. I write them down. Anytime someone sends us something, I write it down and we talk about it the next time. So questions and comments are never overlooked. They're always appreciated. And it helps me not just have to sit here and rattle things off. Hope we landed something tonight. We've been dealing with a lot of strange challenges, and so have a lot of people in the world. Some of ours may be a little bit different than others. And a lot of it is just that people will attack those doing things differently, and people will attack those that are actually rallying people around things that are different. And that's what we're learning a lot right now in society. And we just try and ignore that stuff and do a great job, but it's been coming up on us lately a lot. The only way that we get anywhere is with circulation and help from the people that actually care about this thing. So if that's you, help us. We are firmly in line. Our egos are in the passenger seat, not behind the wheel, and we accept help and we appreciate help. Victim in pain or back on the map? Bailey, I'm not answering that. Good night. Thank you guys.